I started a new high school in junior year. I was an army brat and I moved around a lot. Unlike a lot of kids who had this kind of upbringing, I'm gonna break the mold. I loved it. Spend a year or so hanging out with people, make friends who I could keep in touch with, and then move on to something new and exciting. Genuinely wouldn't have changed my child and teenagehood for anything. My new school was no different. I won't name the school or the state or anything like that, even though it was about 2016. Just cautious, I guess. Some of your viewers seem like they're pretty weird folks, not trying to be rude, but I hang out in those live streams sometimes. I'm just kidding. I love all of you. Now anyway, I'm the kind of sad bastard who's into English and writing and aspires to be a journalist or maybe even a novelist. I know, but hey, I have a finished novel. Nowhere close to publishable quality and a work in progress, so at least I'm doing something with my life. But back then, I spent a lot of time writing in the library. Not ashamed to admit that I wrote a bunch of smutty fanfic. Now this isn't relevant to the story, I promise you. You're just not going to have to read about Markiplier having an affair with Justin McElroy, and yes, I did write one about that. The point is, I'd often get engrossed in my dumb smut writing and wouldn't really notice who was around me. And that's why I'm not sure exactly when Andrew started hanging out in the library, sitting a few tables away from me, pretending to read a middle-grade book but clearly watching me. Now let me tell you about Andrew. Andrew was sort of special needs. He was autistic to some degree on the spectrum anyway, and he was kind of mathematical and actually a science whiz. Academically very smart, but he liked reading middle-grade books, and he could not, for the life of him, communicate with his peers very properly. Now, it didn't help that he was hard of hearing, and so he sort of talked with this sort of awkward voice that unfortunately made him sound special. And there were a couple of ASL students of the school, and apparently he could hold the deepest, most intellectual conversations via ASL on the extremely rare time that he could bring himself to engage with someone else. Now, Andrew had taken to watching me. I saw him all over the place. Pretty much everyone I spoke to admitted that this was pretty odd, so don't get me wrong. You'd assume Andrew would be the prime target for bullying, right? Well, wrong. If one of the jocks saw a guy so much as give Andrew a hard time, that guy would regret it. Everyone loved him. He may have been almost incommunicado, but he was sort of like, I don't know, everyone wanted to look out for the kid. And I mean everyone. And so I was careful who I mentioned Andrew's stalking to. I had a handful of friends that I'd made there, and I did bring it up to them. And at first they sort of said, you have to be mistaken. Andrew isn't like that. He's a gentle giant. Now I should mention he was nearly 7 feet tall. I'm not kidding. But then I pointed him out and the way he'd watch me from corners or just openly, and they couldn't deny it. Andrew was, for want of a better word, stalking me. And the first afternoon he followed me home, I knew that I had to do something. But what? I didn't want to turn people on this otherwise harmless special needs student, and all he was really doing is watching me. It wasn't like with lust. You know how you can just tell when someone's lusting after you? It wasn't like that. It was like he was sort of fascinated with me, or that's what it seemed like at first. Maybe this'll seem stupid, but I decided to do a bit of stalking my own. I stalked Andrew stalking me, stalkception, and I watched him watching me, and I kept a note of his behavior. One of my friends helped me too, and we came to an extremely odd conclusion. He wasn't stalking me or watching me. He was making sure that he stayed near me. In some ways, this made me feel a little bit better, but it also made me feel more confused. I could not for the life of me work out what his motive was, and I was beginning to feel more and more alone. And then things started getting creepy. I started spotting movement in my yard late at night. My parents both worked for the military, and while we didn't live on base, they often worked late. And my brother was a little 12-year-old brat who was more of an expert at video games than possibly protecting me, though I love my brother, so he really in that moment wasn't going to be much use. But there was someone clearly lurking out there, and the motion detector light would constantly get triggered. Then I found the scraping on my car that looked like someone had tried to break the lock open late at night. Next, there was a note slipped into my locker. I don't want to recount exactly what it said, but it described what someone wanted to do to me. And let's just say it was more Patrick Bateman than Patrick Swayze. It was written in beautiful, exquisite cursive, and this confused me even more. Andrew might have been a savant at many subjects, but penmanship was not one of them. I'd seen his essay work. The handwriting was like a middle schooler. Surely he hadn't somehow persuaded another person to write this disgusting note to me. And meanwhile, He just kept watching me, and he was always just sort of there. And then one day, he wasn't. And I found out through the grapevine that Andrew had an appointment of some kind of neurological clinic and would be gone for a few days. And of course, in that moment, I felt some relief. Well, the fool I was. That evening, I found another note in my locker, even worse than the first, and it actually had blood smeared on it. That night, I was alone overnight. It was a Friday. Someone was in my yard and they were making a racket, and I could see this black-clad figure, definitely not Andrew, pulling up plants and weirdly spraying the hose around. Obviously, I called the cops. I even yelled out the window that I called the cops, and the guy didn't leave until almost an hour later when the sound of sirens actually blared off in the distance. Now, I was more confused than ever. There was no doubt that Andrew was stalking me, but then so was someone else. Were they in on it together? It all just seemed so unlikely. And it all came to a head when I was walking home one day. It was sunny, a warm day, so I decided to skip the bus. Who followed behind me, ducking behind walls and hedges? Andrew. Now this wasn't normal, and I was sick of it, and I had to say something, so obviously I turned to confront him. And that's when Andrew charged. Almost 7 feet of muscle barreling towards me from a few hundred feet away, and I was frozen on the spot. And then Andrew veered to the right, and with a scream, he dived into an overgrown hedge on the verge of the park that we were walking past. Out he came, flying with that black-clad figure in his grasp. Andrew slammed this person down and began shaking him back and forward, bouncing his head off the grass, and he was shouting something, but it was hard to tell what in the chaos. I ran forward. I had no idea whose side I was supposed to be on in that moment, and then the black-clad figure's hood fell away, and we made eye contact. He immediately let loose this tirade of disgusting slurs aimed at me, and he seemed under the impression that I duped or hired Andrew into protecting me from him. I had no idea who he was at first, and then one of my friends came running up and yelled, "The janitor?" And the conclusion is absolutely insane. Andrew, and only Andrew, had been observant enough to notice that the janitor was paying unusual attention to me, and from what we could get out of him, he felt a sort of dark aura from it all, and he said that a voice in his head told him to protect me. And so why was that janitor behaving like this to me? So my dad's job in the military is specifically military police. The janitor had been a private about 15 years back, and Dad had been the one responsible for catching him in the middle of assaulting a female officer, and he ensured that he spent time in military jail and was dishonorably discharged. So, when we moved that time, the janitor recognized my dad around town, researched him, discovered he'd had kids, and discovered that I went to the high school that he worked at, and decided to terrorize me. I don't know what kind of voice Andrew heard to protect me. I don't know if I believe in that type of thing, but I do know that I think it saved my life. Maybe he didn't go about it in the best way, but he went about it the only way that he really knew how. And it later turned out that the janitor had even been threatening him, promised to hurt him if he didn't stop watching me, and even that didn't put Andrew off. I did my best to befriend him after that. He wasn't exactly the kind of guy that you could become best of friends with, but I think he knew how grateful I was for what he had done, and I didn't stay at that school for much longer, as Dad's job supposedly called him away, but I think he requested a transfer at that point. I still stay in touch with Andrew via email. We sometimes play chess online, and he kicks my butt every time. We don't really have conversations as such, and it's a weird, strange relationship, really, but he's the guy who saved my life from a pretty dangerous stalker, I think, who, for all I know, would have taken things as far as killing me. So frankly, I'm happy to lose as many chess games to Andrew as he wants. I'm a high school teacher, world history, and I have been for coming up on 25 years now. I sport a buzz cut, I rock a cardigan, and I'm kinda squishy around the middle. And while my wife says it makes me lovable, I make sure that I'm hardly much to look at when it comes to younger people I work with. Now, I don't say the following to brag, though, not at all. If anything, it was a curse, and it was a choice to let myself go. And when I just started out as a teacher in my mid-20s, I was, according to my girlfriend at the time, Hollywood attractive. My wife, who I didn't know at the time, look at old photos of me and say that I look like that Glenn Powell fellow everyone loves these days. Now, I guess I knew I was good looking back in those days. I had flings with more than one of my female coworkers, all single, I'll let you know. And when I wasn't sleeping with the young art teacher or the drama one, I'd prowl the bars for one-night hookups. And you could say that I was a bit of a male slut, I guess. I admit all of this because I want you to know that I want to stress as hard as I can that as soon as I entered the classroom, I became a different person. I wanted to be approachable to the students, sure, but my mentor drummed it into me from day one that I could not become their friend, that I had to inspire them, but I could not take them under my wing, and this was in the very early 2000s too, so imagine how much worse it is now. I knew he wasn't screwing with me. Another teacher at the school I started at had left under a cloud. Supposedly he was having an affair with a male student, and he vehemently denied it. Who knew the truth? But I swore to myself that I would never even wind up in a position where I could be under that suspicion. I liked my women mature enough to hold a conversation with me, to be on my level, and most important, goddamn legal. And the idea of being involved with a student sickens me, and I have nothing but contempt for the men and women who go down that path. If it feels like I'm fixating on it, there's a reason. Obviously, despite my best efforts, I found myself in a situation that became a living hell. I'll call her Billy, although that wasn't her real name. She was a senior, had just turned 18, and she really had everything. Head cheerleader, on track to be the prom queen, and a very solid GPA, and there was no reason for her to want more from academia than she did. Except for some reason, she wanted me. Now when you're a teacher, at least a good one, you can just tell when a student has a crush on you. It's usually harmless. The odd comment, a little lingering after class, and it's easy to put the kibosh on that. But with Billy, it was different. She had a plan, and it started off with very honest-seeming questions about her world history assignments. She'd hang around after class, something I was pretty strict about when it came to having students alone in the classroom, and at first I thought she didn't realize, but it soon became clear that she was intentionally waiting for the classroom to clear before coming to me with questions. Questions I realized that she did not need to ask, being the smart girl that she was. And very quickly, I had to set some firm boundaries. I spoke to some other members of staff and shared my concerns, and they agreed that I was right to be worried. A couple of them had their own experiences with Billy. Nothing too serious, but enough to make them uncomfortable. At the same time, I didn't want to make myself unavailable to students, and so I came up with a structure where my classroom door had to be open up at all times, and my buddy Chris, the English teacher, would conveniently drop by after Billy's world history class when his AP English class also got out. Billy soon stopped trying to get me alone when it became apparent that Chris was here to stay and we were maybe on to her. Now one day, a new member of the admin staff, who wasn't aware of the whole saga, told me that there was a student outside the teacher's lounge asking about me. Now, cup of coffee in hand, I went to see who it was. It had been a month or so since I'd really heard from Billy, so I was a bit surprised to see her standing there. Now, I was even more surprised at the somewhat revealing outfit that she was wearing. Now, I was certain that that did not meet our dress code, but I didn't want to get into all that with her, so I just asked her what was up. Billy told me she was having some trouble with class, despite her grades very much saying the opposite, and asked if she could book some private tutor sessions with me to raise her grade. Of course, I said no, maybe a little too quickly. I felt a pang of guilt and then tried to soften my words a little. I didn't have the time for private lessons. If I offered them to her, then I'd have to offer them to my entire senior class. It just wasn't possible. I did, however, offer her the number of a private tutor who she could hire for further studies, a septuagenarian lady who'd been my world history teacher and tutored occasionally as part of her retirement. And surprisingly, Billy never called the number. I guess the business card caused Billy to sort of snap because that's when I started finding the typed notes tucked under my windshield. They were typed on those old digital word processors that were popular in the 80s, the follow-up from typewriters, and exactly the kind of technology that a rich family such as Billy's might actually own. Now this didn't prove anything, of course, but the increasingly weird love letter content did, and I openly ignored them entirely but made sure to file everyone with the principal. And by now, the entire staff was sure that Billy was the culprit, but A, we had no evidence, and B, we didn't want to accuse an innocent girl, and C, Billy's father was somewhat of a pillar of the community, working in construction building of affordable housing, and also something of a large donor to the school. And they were a decent family, honestly, generous, charitable, and beloved. and if there was some way to handle the Billy situation without ruining her reputation, either at school or with her parents, we wanted to take it. It became harder, though, when those love letters started to become threats. What had started as descriptions of things this person wanted to do to me in a very intimate way shifted into a much more sadist method. It got to the point where myself and the principal were a few notes away from actually going to the cops. What if it wasn't Billy after all? What if it was some sick coincidence? Some woman I hadn't called back after what I'd considered an agreed one-night stand, or a husband I hadn't been informed about. And this theory kind of fell by the wayside when I found a pair of crotchless panties tucked into a drawer in my desk. I kept my classroom locked and made sure no students could be in there alone, so how she'd gotten in was a complete mystery. And if it was Billy, she didn't want to make a secret of it. There was a crocheted letter above the lack of crotch, and the first letter of her real name, and while that didn't mean anything, part of me wondered if she somehow knew that she'd gone too far and had to take steps to ensure that I knew that it was her. She knew I wouldn't call the cops on her. Now, handing a pair of crotchless panties over to my middle-aged female principal was one of the most embarrassing moments of my entire life, even if they were in an envelope, but I still had to explain what they were and then stand there as she removed and studied them. She told me that this couldn't escalate, that she was genuinely concerned for me at this point, as I was young and good-looking, and no, the principal was not one of the colleagues that I'd hooked up with, and made me promise that no matter how guilty I might feel, if it came to it, the law needed to get involved. We were nearing the end of the semester, though, and prom and graduation and all of that, and then I'd never have to see her again, and I wondered if maybe these panties were her final hurrah. But how wrong I was. Much like many of the staff, I was a chaperone at the prom. Billy was a shoo-in to be prom queen along with her prom king boyfriend, Brad, and I kind of hoped that maybe the romantic win up on stage might change things for her, maybe help whatever was going on in her life. And Christ, looking back, I was a dumb 25-year-old and I really did not understand women or anything really, and I don't remember much about the prom. I remember some students getting rowdy and a couple of ejections for drinking on the premises, and weirdly, my biggest memory, save for the incidents, is just how much Billy Idol the DJ played. He was this British guy, and the majority of his repertoire was British music, and I'm not sure how well it landed with the students. But then came the announcement of prom king and queen. Of course, it was Brad and Billy. They took the stage, and Brad gave some gushing speech about how he was with the woman he loved, and he wanted to make her happy for as long as he could, and she'd always be his queen. And then Billy spoke. I'll always remember her opening gambit. She turned to Brad, smacked the crown off his head, and said, "You sicken me." And then she launched into a tirade about how he was a boy playing a man and how he constantly wanted intimacy, and she said some extremely crude things that did not paint Brad in a good light. And my heart broke for her. But then she turned to me and told me that I was the one that she was destined to be with, that I was a real man and we were soulmates and we were destined to be together. Some absolute joker manning the lights put a spotlight on me, and there was just complete awkward silence. What could I do? I had no choice but to tell Billy that there was no chance, that she was a child and I was an adult. And I tried to be as kind as possible. I told her that she'd find someone, but it couldn't be me. And I told her that I did not find her attractive, that she was nothing but just some kid to me. I really didn't notice how much it actually broke her. I was staring in my shoes, worried that I couldn't finish my speech if I looked up at her, and I didn't see the tears pouring down her face and all that mascara. But I did hear the slow clapping and then the laughter and erupting from the entire dance hall, all aimed at Billy, the most embarrassing, mortifying moment of her life, and I'd been the cause of it. But I didn't have time to feel guilty. I saw some movement and I saw Billy leaping down off of the stage. I saw her grab the sharp, lengthy knife that was resting near one of the prom cakes, and I saw her charge straight at me, blade raised, prom dress flying behind her, her face blackened by mascara and tears. And I did the only thing I could think to do as someone that was charging at me with a huge carving knife. I used my years of defensive martial arts training to sidestep her and send her sprawling to the ground. Only she didn't hit the ground. She hit a table behind me on which stood another prom sponge cake, and this one was untouched. The knife flew from her hand and Billy slammed straight into that cake, and the table collapsing under her weight. Everyone was silent for a moment, and then the crowd erupted with even more laughter. Billy pulled herself to her feet, her prom dress ruined, cake and punch and food all over her, and she turned to me, and she stared at me, and I braced myself for the most terrifying threat of my life. And all Billy said was, "I'm sorry," and then turned around and left the school gym. Now, long story short, Billy quite obviously needed obvious psychiatric help that she'd hidden the need for. She had managed to graduate and with a high GPA, but college wasn't on the cards for her. Following the prom and her year of obsession, she spent 2 entire years in a rehabilitation institute. I expected her parents to blame me, and instead they thanked me for how I handled the situation and kept me up to date with her progress. After a year, I moved schools to a different state, and they would write me occasionally. Eventually, they let me know that Billy had been released and asked if I would be willing to receive a letter from her, and they told me they understood if the answer was no, but I decided to say yes. It was a single sheet containing a single paragraph, and I still have that letter to this day, and I can type it verbatim. It said, "Thank you. Thank you for not taking advantage of me. I'm sorry I pushed you so far, and I'm better now. I'm going to college in the fall, and I'm going to study world history, and I will make you proud, sir. Billy." I don't know what kind of life she's living now. I hope it's her best life, and I hope she recovered from whatever caused her behavior. But I know one thing. As I near retirement, Billy taught me as many lessons as I've taught all my students over the years, and I still refuse to be alone in a classroom with anyone who isn't a colleague. I don't think Alex Crowley was his real name, but that's what he went by, and that's what we called him. I didn't know him at first, not personally anyway. He was a sophomore when I was a freshman. I was a grungy skater kid in the late 90s, into Real Big Fish and Green Day and Sublime and a bit of Nirvana and Pearl Jam. I know, both. And I felt kind of like a badass poser because I was into Failure, a band most of my friends didn't even know, and even more badass, I was an American fan of Jesus and Mary Chain. I'd found Darklands and Automatic in an indie record store, and I'd fallen in love with both LPs. I was a bit of a musical snob is what I mean, despite being a 90s skater kid who could do a bit of grinding and a few ollies and landed a 180 spin about once, but mostly just made bailing videos with my buddy. We were the skaters, the losers, the punks, and we loved it. And our heroes, our absolute idols in high school, were the trench coat goths in the year above us. Their leader was a fellow called Alex Crowley, and he claimed to be a direct descendant of famed occultist, mountaineer, ceremonial magician, and founder of the religion of Thelema, Aleister Crowley. But of course he couldn't prove that because Aleister Crowley had so many illegitimate descendants that if you were one of them, you just knew. I suppose maybe that was true, but I'm pretty sure neither of Alex's parents were secret descendants of Aleister Crowley either. And I'm pretty sure the guy ate poop too, so I'm not sure that I'd brag about being related to him personally. Now, I remember when Alex and his crew first approached us as we were sort of skating around. They just stood there in their trench coats, staring and scowling, and there were 4 of them. Alex, Ashley, Jack, and Felicity, the only girl in the group who I had the biggest, maddest crush on and who drove me absolutely wild in her low-cut corsets and goth makeup. Now, she was actually nice too, unlike the others. Jack in particular was a thug, and I'm pretty sure he liked to hurt animals, but I won't dwell on that too much. Alex and Flick are the key players here that you'll have to remember, as well as me, Frankie, and my twin sister Kimmy, who were part of the skate crew. Now, this is how things would play out for about a week. Our group would just nonchalantly skate around on the steps outside the high school, and Alex's group, who I later found out he nicknamed the Sons of Joseph, would just stand there watching us, kind of sneering. And then one weekend, we were hanging out at the skate park when we saw the Sons of Joseph come stalking in. One of the skaters yelled insults and derogatory terms at them, and they weren't exactly seen as the cool people by the older guys. But Alex and co gave us as good as they got, and we were enamored. I was even more enamored when I saw Flick walk over to us. Was she gonna speak to me? Oh my god. Well, no. Actually, she spoke to Kimmy and told her that she was a whiz on the skateboard. And later that night, I told Kimmy how jealous I was, and she would not let me live it down. However, being a good sister, she told me that Flick had invited her to the mall tomorrow and maybe I could tag along. Hell yes, of course I would. And so Kimmy and I got there, and we didn't tell the other guys, and I was a little disappointed to discover that Alex, Jack, and Ashley were there too. Well, I didn't have to worry about Jack for long. He got into a fight with a security guard and he got thrown out of the mall, and Alex said that he was done with that prick. He was a liability and he didn't understand the ways, and maybe Kimmy and I would like to take Jack's place in the Sons of Joseph. Now, one look from Flick's bright, mascaraed eyes, and I was nodding like some puppy dog. Kimmy was a little bit more sensible and asked what the Sons of Joseph actually meant. I remember Alex tapping his nose and said that was something we'd discover in time. Sure, whatever, Kimmy said. And Alex replied saying that he'd hoped we'd brought money because we'd need whole new wardrobes to join their crew. I'm not ashamed to say that Kimmy and I came from a pretty wealthy family, and Kimmy was trusted with Dad's credit card. Not me, though. He knew that I'd wasted on probably video games, and she was pretty certain that spending the money on clothes would please our parents, so Alex, Ashley, and Flick led us to a hot topic. My outfit was a trench coat, a Misfits t-shirt, and a pair of leather pants that squeaked when I walked. Now, I wasn't so sure about this, but Alex promised me the squeaking would eventually wear off, and I thought about buying some cool boots, but they convinced me that my purple and black skater DCs looked kinda dope with the goth outfit. Kimmy, meanwhile, got dressed out by Flick, and I gotta say, it was extremely disconcerting to see my sister in fishnets, a miniskirt, and a mesh top with her bra visible beneath. In fact, I actually tried to persuade her that our parents really wouldn't approve of that. And she kind of listened and bought a second outfit that was more like a velour dress and made her look like a vampire, and I suppose that was pretty cool. Now, I could tell that Alex had eyes for Kimmy, and I wasn't sure how I felt about that. I wasn't sure how I felt about him at all, now that I'd spent an afternoon with him. He talked and talked and talked, and he talked about his connection to Aleister Crowley and Thelemic magic and crap like that. Ashley brought up the Satanic Bible, and Alex laughed. I kid you not, for 5 minutes straight in the food court of KFC before declaring that Anton LaVey was a fraud who wouldn't know true Satanism if it bit him in the ass. I figured now wasn't the best time to tell them that Kimmy and I were Christians, so we just nodded along. I did do some reading about Thelemic lore and the Order of Thelema and things like that over the next few months because I'm nothing if not academically curious. It amused me to discover that Alex was basically just making up crap. None of the garbage he spewed was accurate at all, and even though by then I'd already realized that he was a complete charlatan, it was nice to have something to laugh with Kimmy about. Speaking of Kimmy, Alex was constantly, relentlessly trying to get into her pants. Kimmy could hold her own and had obviously no interest in letting Alex take her virginity, but it still made me defensive. He was a creep and a weirdo, and not only that, he was always claiming to hear voices from his true father. He could never decide whether his true father was Aleister Crowley or Satan himself, and in his head I think that they were sort of interchangeable. One of the messages he mysteriously received was that Kimmy should engage in Thelemic intimate magic with him, and when she flat out refused, he said that dancing naked for him with sigils drawn on her body would be enough. Kimmy stopped hanging out with him after that. Too exhausting, she said, and she begged me to ditch them too, but at this point, I'd kind of abandoned all my other friends. But to make matters worse, I was deeply, hopelessly, head over heels in love with Flick, and it wasn't unrequited either. We were a couple, but we had to keep it a secret from Alex because according to him, the Sons of Joseph, male or female, must only lay with him and nobody else. Ashley had ditched the group by this time too and started hanging out with the chess club. We had a new member, and by the name of Norbit, I'm being serious, a nerdy kid whose presence I couldn't even begin to explain. And so the only way for me and Flick to be together was to pretend to tolerate Alex. Any attempt that we made to ditch him resulted in him mysteriously appearing or showing up at my house, which was even worse because I didn't want him anywhere near my sister. Things would have been fine, I think, if Alex hadn't suddenly had an influx of hormones and decided that his true father was sending him messages that we all needed to obey. Suddenly, Norbert's presence made sense. He was a member of the AV club, and Alex's dark father had instructed him to rig a video camera hidden in the vents in the female changing rooms so we could corrupt the fair sex in the name of Satan without them even knowing. Of course, Flick and I were horrified by this, and Kimmy wanted to kill Alex as soon as I told her, but simply talking about something wasn't a crime. We needed proof that he was actually planning on doing it. He gave Norbit a list of times for the recordings. I stole a copy, and surprise, surprise, they were all times when Kimmy would be coming out of the gym or out of the pool, and this creep was basically planning to stalk my sister by filming her naked. I took Norbert to one side and Flick, and I told him in no uncertain terms that if he went ahead with his plan, we would not only ruin him and his entire high school career, but there was a good chance we'd end his life too. This dumb freshman, I was a sophomore at this point, Flick was a junior, fell for it, and I guess took it so seriously that he changed schools within the month. When it became clear to Alex that his plan to film the girls' locker room had failed, he flew into a rage. He slammed me up against the wall of the AV room, which we now had the keys to thanks to Norbert, and told me that this wasn't going to happen, and that I was going to have to be the one to film Kimmy. I'd be able to do it at home easily, and his true father, the Dark Lord, would bestow upon me untold riches. I told him where he could shove his untold riches, and if he came anywhere near us again, he'd wish he'd never been born. Finally, myself, Kimmy, and Flick were free. Flick and I were able to date openly now, and Kimmy didn't have to worry about this creep trying to, well, creep on her. Or so we thought. As one night Kimmy, Flick, and I were hanging out in Kimmy's bedroom playing 3-player GoldenEye deathmatch, and suddenly, a red light kept glaring on the screen. Initially, Kimmy jokingly blamed one of us, saying that we were trying to put her off with a laser pointer. But then the red light quickly disappeared, and we heard some scuffling and banging outside. I ran to the window to see this trench coat figure fleeing into the night. It was obviously Alex. He'd been testing to see if he could film Kimmy himself through her bedroom window. Flick had the dumbest yet funniest idea. Using our brand new color printer, we printed out a huge image of a fat man's ass and taped it on the window, and then we waited for Alex to come back that night, which we knew he would, and we heard him out there. He was hardly subtle. Kimmy yelled that she was going to take a shower, and we gave it 10 minutes, and then we pulled the blinds open, revealing the large printout of that ass. And I guess Alex had been filming because we heard this sort of strangled shriek and then the clattering of something falling to the floor, and saw that a trench-coated figure was running away again. When we went out there, the school's camcorder lay abandoned in the flower bed. We watched through the tape. It turned out he'd filmed Kimmy more than he thought. We were all watching when she snatched the videotape away from us and watched the next few minutes alone, and her face went pale. "Just underwear," she said. "But I feel sick." Kimmy didn't tell us anything else. Neither of us asked either. But a few days later, Alex was found with both of his legs broken, apparently by a baseball bat, and he claimed that he'd been jumped by a gang of black guys. When we asked Kimmy if she had planned to pursue the video any further, she just said no. I don't want to say that my sister kneecapped a goth stalker while in high school, but let's just say, years later, and even though you passed away 6 years ago, I'll always be proud of you, Kimmy. My high school years took place in the mid-2000s. I'm a female, and for most of my high school career, probably until senior year, my entire friend group was made up of girls and one single guy, called Guy, who was probably the gayest fellow you could ever meet. We all had this weird thing where we decided that none of us were going to date during high school, and this completely went out of the way during senior year when, I guess, hormones just became too much, but as far as I know, most of us stuck to it. Sure, we snuck a kiss at a party here and there, and I'm not saying that we were prude little good girls, but we had this pact with each other that we were just going to focus on our studies. And that's why we were so shocked when one of our girlies, perhaps the most straight-laced, accidentally let slip that she had a mother-effing sugar daddy. We grilled our friend Samantha within an inch of her life. What had he bought you? Shoes, clothes, jewelry? She had it all to display. Was she physical with him? Of course, very much so. She was sorry that she'd broken the pact, but Mr. X might be the one, and she didn't want to let that slip through her fingers, not when he was so much older than her. Of course, that was scandalous by itself and led to another round of questioning. How old was he? Mid-40s? Was he married? And Samantha shyly admitted that yes, he was. Married with kids. Did we know this guy? Samantha said no, but her hesitation in her eyes, they said yes. It was a man in his 40s with kids that we knew. Now, we pretended to let it drop. We lied and said we were happy for her. Of course, we were all pretty disgusted that our 16-year-old friend was being taken advantage of by a 45-year-old man who was clearly lying about leaving his wife for her and keeping her sweet by giving her some fairly gaudy stuff. I don't know much about sugar daddies, but honestly, I would have expected a little more from the gifts. She said he took her out to dinner too and stayed in some nice hotels, but still. So we pretended to drop it, and instead, we all secretly spied on Samantha individually. I know it sounds awful, but I'll stand by it. We didn't want our friend being seduced by some dirty old man. And there was one guy whose name kept coming up, Mr. Kurswell, one of the science teachers. Samantha would often meet with him after class, and while we couldn't spy for too long, it was absolutely the only lead we had. So Mr. Kurswell became our target, and there was definitely something off about him. He'd sneak phone calls into hidden corners during lunch break. If he was using his laptop when class started, he'd often slam it closed and make sure that we weren't looking before he opened it again. There was something very off about this guy, and we became more and more convinced that this balding, bespectacled biology teacher was the one boinking our buddy. But the question was, what next? That's when Guy had this bright idea of trying to follow Mr. Kurswell one weekend. We had no idea where he'd go or when he'd go, but we decided to time it for a Saturday where Samantha had also refrained from hanging out and heavily claimed that she had a hot date with her mystery sugar daddy. If it was Kurswell, then boom, we were in luck. If not, maybe we'd catch sight of the real culprit. And so we all loaded into Guy's car, and apparently, as subtle as a cop tailing a suspect, we followed Samantha for nearly an hour and found ourselves in the next town over. It was one of those little towns that you kind of look down on. Jokes about the folks there being inbred and the fact that there was a weird smell. A cellophane factory explained that, and just kind of overall crappy. Not exactly the place that you'd expect a hot date with a sugar daddy. Samantha headed into this crappy mall, and we followed at a pretty long distance, and it became clear pretty quickly that she was checking out some stores. There were 4 of us without Samantha, so we decided that it didn't make sense for the entire group to tail her. We'd be spotted in an instant. And she was headed mostly into these girly stores, so despite her penchant for glitter and pink, we figured Guy should hang back. It was decided that I was the most nondescript and unnoticeable. Not sure if that was a compliment, but it worked well enough here. And so I followed Samantha into a bunch of stores, and what I saw shocked me. The gifts her sugar daddy had been bestowing on her, she was shoplifting them. I followed her into 4 stores and watched as she stole costume jewelry, lingerie, a crop top, and all sorts of crap. Not once did she get spotted by security either. I hightailed it out of there. I didn't want to get wrapped up in all of that, and I didn't want to look complicit. And so I met my friends at the agreed point, a sort of hidden area where we weren't in much danger of being spotted by Samantha. I was all ready to hit them with my revelation, but I didn't have a chance. They were the ones who hit me with the gossip. We were right. Our science teacher, Mr. Kurswell, was here in the same mall as Samantha, and what more proof did we need? I waited until they finished chattering and then told them what I'd observed. There was no sugar daddy offering gifts. Samantha was a kleptomaniac. Presumably she'd traveled to the next town over because the local mall security were getting suspicious in our town. And so everyone was absolutely baffled. They definitely seemed Kurswell, and he definitely seemed sketchy. And at the same mall as Samantha, too. Could it be possible that they were having a fling, but the gifts were stolen for our benefit to try and justify all of it? Or had we been stalking our friend for literally no reason? It didn't make any sense. Why would Kurswell be at this mall? Now, it was over an hour outside of town, and our local mall was 1,000 times better. All we could do was head out and plan to head home, but first we decided to stop by the food court to grab some macas. And that's when we saw him. Mr. Kurswell sat at a goddamn McDonald's 2-seater holding hands with someone who was not his wife. And it wasn't Samantha, though, either. Mr. Kurswell and the man whose hand he held both turned to us. The unknown man looked puzzled. Mr. Kurswell looked sick. He stood up and immediately began pleading for us to come over. Now, let's get this straight. If we hadn't suspected Kurswell of being Samantha's sugar daddy, we would have gone on liking the dude. He was one of our favorite teachers, in fact. And now, he looked close to tears. The idea of him having an affair, even if it was to hide the truth of his identity, kind of made me feel sick, and the first thing I thought was, his poor wife. But then he called it over and explained everything. His wife knew. She too was of the same kind of proclivities as he was. She'd also always wanted kids, which were indeed his, and they both loved their kids very much. And they loved each other too, but in their own little way. But this whole business had begun years ago, before homosexuality was quite so acceptable, and the whole deal that they had with the kids and an unusual marriage, it had been a long-term lie that they just didn't want to have to explain to friends and family. He said that we could call his wife if we wanted. He said that he knew we were good kids, and he said that he was sure that some of us understood, looking pointedly at Guy at this point. And that's how the stalking of our best friend and our science teacher led us to helping him and his wife cover up their conventional marriage. We provided alibis and we did all sorts of things. And we also kind of cut Samantha off after we tried our best to talk her out of being a klepto. She refused and also saw no problem with the sugar daddy lie. We didn't tell her anything about Kurtzwell, but we did tell her that we'd had a suspect and she didn't seem to care about their well-being. It just made us realize that people are never who they seem to be or who you expect them to be. And as a funny aside, Guy, who is the campiest, gayest man I've ever met, eventually realized that he was just as into women as he was into men, and now he's one of the biggest players, in a nice way, that I've ever met. Mr. Kurtzwell still lives with his wife, and their kids have gone off to college now, and they're considering finally living their true lives. Their kids know the truth and have done so for many years, but ultimately, it's whatever makes them happy. All I'm glad is that our one little jaunt into stalking didn't lead to the ruination of multiple lives. But I'll tell you what, from now on, I've decided that unless it seems like someone's in danger, nothing is my business to get involved in. It was my idea to put on a horror production. We were the alternative theater kids. We begged the drama teacher to let a bunch of us do our own thing, and instead of yet another performance of West Side Story or Grease, all our bitching worked, and eventually Mrs. J relented. Now, my friend Kirsten wrote the script. It was a slasher play rife with squibs and blood and fake ghosts, and low on plot, really. Nobody was going to attend expecting to see Waiting for Godot, though. They wanted blood, guts, and one shocking scene, boobs. Now don't worry, we used prosthetics. None of us were getting our boobs out for a goddamn school play. Plus, we didn't want to get expelled, obviously. We practiced that play for God knows how many times, and at that stage we knew it off by heart. But something we'd never done is perform it at night. And that's when it would be debuting as a horror play, so, of course, we begged and pleaded with Mrs. J to let us start one final rehearsal at 8 p.m. It took some cajoling, but she relented. The grumpy, scary janitor even agreed to stay late to keep an eye on us so we didn't break his crap. Now, we were all excited. There were 8 of us in total, 6 players, the director, myself, and the lighting and sound guy. I won't list all 8 names because you'll forget them all, but the 4 important ones are me, Ayla, Victor as an actor, Judd as an actor who plays the killer, and Clyde as an actor, the tragic hero. And so we ran through the first scene where a few of the characters are playing spin the bottle in a cabin in the woods. The bottle stops 5 times, creating the shape of a pentagram, and a visual effect causes a mysterious puff of smoke to leave the bottle. Dead impressive. Of course, all the characters decide that it's the ghosts of Rancid Jack, a serial killer who stalked those woods 100 years ago. And of course it is. So the rest of the play continues with the characters getting picked off by Rancid Jack one by one, until only Vicky, the virgin final girl, and Clyde, the boyfriend, are left. After we ran through the first scene, 2 of the actors went outside for a smoke break, and they never returned. It didn't matter too much, we just decided to mess around tweaking some of the practical effects. The sound guy did a bunch of improvements too, and I really think we had something special on our hands. To this day, I swear that if we'd actually got to perform this damn play, it would have gone down in our high school history, and not just because of the prosthetic bloody boobs. Now, eventually, we needed our 2 missing actors, so the other actor, Layla, went to look for them. She didn't return either, but we did hear a scream. This caused Judd and Clyde to go running out into the barely lit corridor. Me and Vicky stayed behind like the nervous girls we were, and of course Denny, the sound guy, had to stay and protect us. Now, this was his excuse anyway. Eventually, Clyde and Judd returned, looking pale and terrified. There'd been no sign of any of the missing 3, except for a bucket load of blood. Some of it was outside and some of it was in the corridor. Now, of course, we all started freaking out. The only person in the building who wasn't accounted for was the freaky janitor, Mr. Williams. All sorts of rumors circulated about this guy. He was an ex-con. He'd spent time inside for killing a man in a bar fight, and he'd fought in Vietnam and had the highest kill count in his unit. He had a tin of Viet Cong teeth in his little basement office. One student swore blind that they'd seen it before Williams had chased him off. Now, there was no doubt in my mind, freaked out by constant horror play rehearsals and the alleged blood, that this janitor had killed our friends. Maybe he'd watched the play and it had triggered the Nam flashbacks. Who knew? Denny and Vicky and Judd volunteered to go get help, which, thinking back now, was kind of an odd group. Why 3 of them? All I knew was that this left me with Clyde, my IRL boyfriend, and I wasn't going to argue against holding up with him. Now, we hid in the sound booth and listened in horror as we heard running footsteps and screams and even pleas for help. All 3 of our friends had met grisly fates, we thought, and that just left us. We had no choice but to try and escape the building and call the cops. Clyde grabbed a heavy metal bar and we made our way into the corridors, and if there had been blood there before, it was gone now. Williams must have cleaned it up, and there was no sign of the bodies either. I was crying, begging Clyde to protect me, begging him not to let me die. And then, up ahead of us, the door to the maintenance area burst open. The janitor stood there, some pole held in his hand, and a look of fury on his face. He yelled, asking what the hell we thought we were doing. Clyde didn't even think to stop. He charged Williams with a metal pipe and cracked him in the skull, and this sent him collapsing to the ground, and then Clyde went to town hammering the guy's legs so he couldn't come after us. And between the grunts, he told me that he didn't want to kill him, that he had to face justice, but he had to make sure the guy never walked again and couldn't come after us. And by the time he was done, Williams' right leg was a bloody pulp, and the left had visible bone fractures in 3 places. Williams was trying to say something. Blood was bubbling out of his mouth, but Clyde kicked him in the side. Then the door burst open, and the rest of the cast yelled, "Surprise!" The cry died on their lips as they saw Williams lying on the floor, Clyde standing over him with a bloody dripping pipe like a madman, and the whole thing had been an idiotic, ill-fated prank. Everyone was in on it except for myself and Clyde, and Mr. Williams apparently. The prank ruined all of our lives. Despite thinking he was protecting his girlfriend from a stalker, Clyde faced charges when Williams, quite understandably, demanded that the full weight of the law come down upon him. And due to the extenuating circumstances, he only spent a couple of years in juvie, but it still ruined his life. The others had to live with the guilt of what they caused. They were all expelled, of course, and more than one of them ended up taking a dark path through life. And from what I know, at least one of them has ended their life over that guilt. As for me, I don't know that I'll ever get over it. Seeing Clyde defend me like that only to mutilate an innocent man, and even then I can't convince myself that there wasn't a serial killer trying to take us all out that night. My head is a mess. I've been in and out of institutes, and my latest therapist recommended that I blog about my teenage drama. I don't know if sending my story into Let's Read is the best, most cathartic idea. I know many of your audience will tell me I'm a terrible person and that we all deserve what we got. Maybe that's what I need to hear. Maybe I need to accept that we all jumped the gun and acted like fucking retards. I know we did. I guess I just need to self-flagellate, and I'm hoping that the Let's Read audience will finally either help me move on or help me blame myself enough to make a final decision. All I want to say is, Mr. Williams, if you happen to hear this from heaven or wherever you are right now, I'm sorry. You didn't deserve any of that, and you weren't a stalker, and I'm sorry my boyfriend crippled you. Hey Dark Somnium, I'm a YouTuber just like you, not quite as big sadly. I've only got a few thousand subscribers since 2012, but I'm getting there. I got some plans for the next year that should bring me into the big time. I'd love to pick your brain for some help in getting bigger actually, and if you got the time one day, email me at drinkthepiss@gmail.com anytime you want to chat, and would be really appreciated. Now, I'm not just emailing you trying to collaborate though, I promise. I have a quick scary story that I want to share with you and your lovely audience. Please subscribe to me on my channel, by the way. And so my channel is, I've kind of hit a brick wall. I hit a few thousand subscribers back in the 2010s when stupid Call of Duty videos and YouTube poops were popular, and I've never really grown since then. People don't care about goofy COD videos anymore, it seems, or baked memes, and it makes me sad. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is, I was a high schooler when I got big on YouTube. As you know, being an old man veteran, a few thousand subs was a big deal back in 2013, before the likes of my heroes like Leafy and iDubbbz, not to mention the main man Charlie and that Hassan Piker the Twitch streamer. And the way I figure it, when you factor in inflation, 3,000 subs in 2013 is about the same as 10 million now, give or take. And so, when some kids at my school discovered that I was a YouTuber with what they saw was a crazy amount of subs, I became something of a celebrity. They uncovered my double life because I made the mistake of watching my own content on the library computers, and they saw what I was up to. Oh well, I thought. I kind of expected that I'd just become a minor celebrity in 6th form, as I went to one of the UK schools that includes 6th form as part of the school itself, and yeah, I guess that happened. Now what I didn't foresee, though, was Rick. Rick was in the year below me, so AS level, and he was a film studies student. When he discovered I was a successful YouTuber, he went kinda nuts. It took him a few days to gather the courage to approach me, but when he did that day in the cafeteria, there was no stopping him. Rick talked. A lot. He had all these ideas for my YouTube channel. Ideas that even I, as a forward-thinking and imaginative individual, could clearly tell were too ambitious. Now, I was out there making COD fail videos, SpongeBob memes, and Counter-Strike parkour videos while talking about the latest online drama. Rick basically wanted us to make a goddamn feature film. I wouldn't have minded so much about Rick sitting at the cafeteria table with me every free period. Nobody else really did, and they were a bit intimidated by me being a big YouTuber, except for the fact that Rick stunk. And now, excuse my language, but he smelled like Jason Momoa's armpit hair. In the end, my nasal cavities couldn't put up with Rick's stink anymore, so I told him that I just wasn't interested in his stupid video ideas. And I could see the tears welling up in this kid's eyes as I told him the home truths he needed to hear, and I thought that'd be the end of it. But no. I kept finding notes in the common room, the cafeteria, and all of my classrooms pinned to the notice board and the whiteboard. Sometimes they'd just say, "Make videos with me, please, Rick." And other times they'd be an entire page describing some idea about an entire zombie movie that he wanted us to film and release on my YouTube channel. And the more I found the notes, the more Rick kept bragging about how his YouTube channel was growing. So in the end, I looked up the channel name that he'd given me, Ricky Dicky Davy. It's thankfully gone now, and saw that the chode had 8 subscribers. Effing heck, mate. I subscribe anyway, out of pity. Big mistake, I think, and this inspired Rick to start posting. A lot. But he didn't just post the usual YTPs or takedowns of Pokemon or Content Cop or elephants pooping at the zoo. No. Every video he posted was a clip of behind the scenes of a famous YouTuber. He didn't say a famous YouTuber. He said my username, but I don't want to do too much self-promotion here. It was crazy. The dude had been filming me all around college, from a distance, eating alone in a cafe, hanging out on the quad smoking a cigarette, playing squash in the gym, coming out of the changing rooms all sweaty. And I kid you not, he filmed me in the changing rooms, not naked thankfully, but titled, "Famous YouTuber Works Hard for His Fans." Now, I could immediately tell this was stalking, pure and simple. Now, I'd had enough of this Rick guy. I found him spying on me one day and took his digital camera and smashed it to pieces on the ground. I slammed him up against a wall and told him that if he ever filmed me ever again, if I ever saw him on my channel again, I would ruin his life with all of the power of a certain Chan-based message board who I had a good relationship with thanks to my videos. I thought Rick got the message. I got an in-school suspension for fighting, but it was worth it. Rick left the school at the end of the term, but not before telling me he'd get even with me. I thought nothing more of the confused little prick for 3 years. He never uploaded again, and I went off to college and continued my career. Things weren't great. I struggled to make friends and then hit rock bottom when my girlfriend left me, and I'd never know what true suffering was like until then. I became a bit of a shut-in for a while, but eventually got over it and became a party animal. Filming it all, of course. And speaking of filming, there was one final twist in the tale. One day, I get an alert on YouTube saying that Ricky Dicky Davy has uploaded, and so I click the video out of morbid curiosity. It's a series of videos, in fact. A series of videos taken on a handheld camera filming a house at night from outside. My house. My shared house at college. Somehow Rick had tracked me down. I watched in horror as he just filmed me through my living room doing my stretches and exercises and playing the PlayStation. And that was all. Just hours and hours of footage of me doing nothing. The video ended with a movie maker text saying, "This is the price of fame." Then Rick walked back towards the camera, showing a steaming turd on my driveway. A turd that I remembered picking up that morning and believing it to belong to the dog next door. Ricky Ticky Davies' channel is now gone. Mine's still up, and again, I'd really appreciate a shout out to the channel if you read the story. But even though I only have a few thousand followers and I've moved twice since the events of this story, I still live in fear that one day, Stinky Rick will find me and make me the subject of his new video, and this time, it'll be a snuff film. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and there are super fun live streams on Sundays and Wednesday nights. If you got a story, be sure to submit them over to my email at letsreadsubmissions@gmail.com and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks and bonus content from members of the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories and big compilations located anywhere you listen to podcasts. And I also have a true crime channel called Saturn Soul. Please go subscribe. All links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, trail mix is human kibble.